Mountain Man hired a pregnant widow as cook, but she taught him what love really means. The mountains of New Montana Colony were wide and quiet. Tall pine trees stood like silent guards along the rocky ridges. The wind carried cold air down from the snowy peaks, and sometimes strange blue lights flickered across the sky when distant energy storms passed over the planet's upper atmosphere. Elias Boone lived alone in those mountains. His cabin stood near the edge of a deep valley, built from strong timber and reinforced steel panels brought from the colony town many years ago. Solar sheets lined the roof. A small wind turbine turned slowly behind the cabin, humming like a sleepy machine. The place was simple, strong, and built for survival. Elias had once lived closer to people. Long ago, he worked as a frontier scout, guiding cargo transports across rough land while the colony was still young. He knew how to track alien wildlife. He knew how to fix damaged air filters and repair broken plasma fences. He knew how to survive storms that shut down communications for days. But after a mining collapse took the lives of 3 men from his scout team, Elias stopped working for the colony. He stopped laughing. He stopped staying in town. He moved into the mountains and built his cabin far away from noise and memory. Most days followed the same pattern. He woke before sunrise, checked the perimeter sensors around his land, and made strong black coffee from imported beans he rationed carefully. After that, he tended his small hydroponic garden inside a side room, where artificial grow lights kept vegetables alive, even during long winters. In the afternoons, he patrolled the tree line using his hoverbike, watching for large predators that sometimes came down from the higher forests. The planet was mostly safe now, but wild creatures still lived beyond the colony's reach. Elias liked it that way. Silence did not ask questions. Silence did not remind him of loss. One late autumn afternoon, while he was repairing a fence generator near the North Ridge, he heard a distant rumble in the sky. He looked up and saw smoke cutting through the clouds. A transport shuttle. It was descending too fast. Elias narrowed his eyes. The shuttle's stabilizers were flickering. Sparks flashed near one engine. It struggled to control its path and then vanished behind the trees beyond the valley. A few seconds later, the ground trembled slightly. Elias did not hesitate. He dropped his tools, mounted his hoverbike, and rode toward the crash site. The wind grew colder as he moved downhill, and broken branches scattered across the forest floor told him the landing had not been smooth. The shuttle had crashed into a clearing between thick trees. One wing was torn. The front cabin was dented, but it had not exploded. That meant someone inside might still be alive. Elias forced the damaged door open with effort. Smoke drifted out slowly. Inside, he found a woman strapped into the pilot's seat. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and her face was pale but conscious. She tried to speak but coughed instead. "It's okay," Elias said in a calm voice. "You're safe now." Her name, he later learned, was Clara Hale. She had been traveling from the Lower Valley settlement to a mining camp where she had accepted a cooking job. Her husband had died months earlier during a plasma storm while transporting cargo between settlements. Since then, she had been trying to rebuild her life. When Elias helped her out of the shuttle, he noticed something else. She was expecting a child. The realization made him pause, but only for a second. He lifted her carefully and carried her toward his bike. The cold air bit at his skin as daylight faded quickly behind the mountains. The shuttle's emergency beacon blinked weakly, but Elias knew storms were forming in the upper atmosphere again. Rescue teams would not reach this far until the weather cleared. He brought Clara to his cabin. Inside, the warmth from the central heater wrapped around them. Elias laid her gently on the narrow bed in the guest corner he rarely used. He cleaned a small cut on her forehead and checked her pulse. She was tired and shaken but strong. "You can stay until rescue comes," he told her. "Storm season is close, travel might be delayed." Clara nodded slowly. Even in pain, her eyes were steady. "Thank you," she whispered. The first night felt strange to Elias. Another person's breathing filled the cabin. Soft footsteps replaced his usual heavy ones. He made a simple stew from dried beans and preserved vegetables. Clara insisted on sitting up to help stir the pot. "You should rest," he said. "I've rested enough," she answered with a faint smile. "I can still cook." The stew tasted better than his usual meals. Elias did not comment on it, but he noticed. Days passed. The sky darkened earlier each evening as winter approached. Clara recovered quickly. She moved slowly because of her pregnancy, but she was determined to contribute. She cleaned shelves, she organized storage crates, she even repaired a loose kitchen panel that Elias had ignored for months. The cabin began to feel different. Before Clara arrived, it had been a shelter. Now it felt almost alive. One afternoon, while Elias was splitting firewood outside, he heard laughter from inside the cabin. He froze for a moment, surprised by the sound. It had been years since laughter echoed from those walls. Clara was reading from an old digital tablet she had found in a drawer. It contained colony history logs, including stories from the early settlers who had first landed on the planet. "They were brave," she said when Elias stepped inside, "leaving Earth and starting over." Elias shrugged. "They had no choice." Clara looked at him carefully. "Sometimes starting over is a choice." Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. At night, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind howled against the reinforced walls. Elias reinforced the exterior shields and checked the power cells twice each evening. Clara often stood on the porch, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the twin moons rise above the mountains. The pale silver light made the snow glow softly. "It's beautiful here," she said one night. "It's quiet," Elias replied. "That too," she said gently. He realized something slowly. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt shared. But Elias guarded his heart carefully. He reminded himself this arrangement was temporary. When the weather cleared, rescue teams would arrive. Clara would return to the settlement. His cabin would return to silence. One evening, as orange light faded behind the peaks, Clara sat at the small wooden table, folding fabric she planned to turn into baby clothes. Elias watched her hands move with care. "You're not afraid?" he asked suddenly. "Of what?" "Raising a child alone." Clara paused for a moment, then she shook her head. "I've already survived losing someone I loved," she said softly. "Fear doesn't help, love does." Elias had no answer to that. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. A deep warning signal blinked on Elias' weather monitor. An iron storm was forming faster than expected. Travel routes would close, communications might fail. The mountains would be cut off for weeks, maybe months. He looked at Clara, then at the small fabric clothes folded neatly on the table. The storm was coming, and for the first time in years, Elias felt something stronger than fear. He felt responsibility. As the first heavy winds struck the cabin walls, he understood that Clara was not just a guest waiting for rescue anymore. She was part of his winter, and winter in the mountains always changed a man. Winter arrived faster than Elias expected. The iron storm rolled across the sky like a living thing. Blue lightning flashed between dark clouds, and strong winds pushed heavy snow across the mountains. The temperature dropped sharply, turning the forest into a frozen world of silence and white shadows. Inside the cabin, Elias prepared for long isolation. He checked every system twice. Solar panels were locked into storm mode. Backup batteries were fully charged. The air filter hummed steadily, keeping the inside warm and safe. Clara watched him move from task to task. She could see how serious he became when danger came close. His calm face rarely changed, but his hands worked quickly, fixing small problems before they became big ones. "This storm will last?" she asked one evening as the wind howled outside. "Long enough," Elias replied. "Maybe weeks, maybe more," she nodded slowly. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet understanding. They settled into a new routine. Each morning, Elias checked the perimeter sensors while Clara prepared breakfast. She learned how to manage the heating controls and water recycler. In return, she showed Elias better ways to organize food storage so supplies would last longer. The cabin began to feel like a shared space instead of a lonely shelter. Snow fell day and night. Sometimes it covered the windows completely, turning the outside world into nothing but shifting white light. The storm disrupted communication towers, leaving Elias unable to contact the colony. They were alone. One afternoon, the power flickered as a strong energy surge passed overhead. The lights dimmed, then returned. Elias quickly moved to stabilize the system while Clara held a lantern nearby, watching carefully. "You've done this before," she said. "Too many times," he answered. She smiled softly. "Good thing I crashed near the right cabin." He did not respond, but he felt a small warmth in his chest. During the long evenings, Clara cooked meals that filled the cabin with comforting smells. She used dried herbs Elias had gathered during summer and added small touches that turned simple food into something special. They began to talk more. At first, their conversations were short. Weather, supplies, repairs. Then slowly, deeper stories appeared. Clara spoke about her late husband. She described him not with sadness but with respect. She told Elias how he had always believed in new beginnings, even when life felt uncertain. Elias listened quietly. One night she asked about his past. He hesitated. Memories were heavy things he avoided carrying. But the storm outside made the world feel distant, and the warm light inside the cabin made silence harder to maintain. He told her about his years as a frontier scout, about guiding travelers through dangerous land, about the mining collapse that changed everything. "I survived," he said quietly. "They didn't." Clara did not offer easy comfort. She simply listened. "That doesn't mean you failed," she said gently. Elias stared at the fire for a long time after that. Days blended together. Snow piled higher against the walls. Sometimes strange sounds came from the forest at night, alien creatures searching for shelter or food. Elias reinforced the outer fence and stood guard when needed. One evening, motion alarms sounded near the North Ridge. Elias grabbed his thermal coat and stepped outside into the cold. Several large, shadowy shapes moved near the trees. The creatures were curious but cautious, drawn by the warmth of the cabin. He activated the defense lights, sending bright pulses across the snow. The creatures retreated slowly, disappearing into the darkness. When he returned inside, his hands were freezing. Clara guided him to sit near the heater. She wrapped warm cloth around his fingers, her movements careful and steady. "You take care of everything," she said quietly. "Let someone take care of you sometimes." Elias felt something shift inside him at her words. He had spent years protecting himself from feeling too much. But here, in this small cabin surrounded by endless snow, walls he had built inside himself began to weaken. As weeks passed, Clara's pregnancy advanced. She moved more slowly, and Elias adjusted the cabin to make things easier for her. He built a handrail along the hallway. He cleared extra space near the bed. Without thinking about it, he started carving a cradle from mountain pine. The wood felt smooth beneath his hands. Each cut and shape felt meaningful, though he did not say why. Clara noticed the cradle one morning and paused beside it. "You made this?" He nodded, suddenly unsure of himself. "It's strong," she said softly, "like this place." Her words stayed with him the rest of the day. Despite the warmth inside, the storm grew stronger outside. Blue lightning flashed across the sky more frequently. Energy waves rattled the cabin shields. One night, a massive surge hit the power system. The lights went out completely, leaving only emergency lanterns glowing faintly. Elias worked quickly, opening panels and reconnecting circuits while Clara held the light steady. The wind screamed like a living creature, shaking the walls. Suddenly, Clara gasped and grabbed the table. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, his voice sharp with concern. She took a slow breath. "Just pressure, maybe stress." He watched her carefully. Fear crept into his chest, stronger than any storm. She sat down slowly, closing her eyes for a moment. "It will pass," she said calmly. "Don't worry." But Elias did worry. He checked her health monitor twice that night, unable to rest. The idea that something might happen to her or the child filled him with a deep unease he had not felt in years. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Inside, silence settled between them again, but this silence was different. It was full of unspoken care. The next morning, the sky turned a strange pale color as energy waves moved across the atmosphere. Elias stepped onto the porch to check the horizon. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, glowing under weak sunlight. Behind him, Clara prepared breakfast, humming softly. He realized then that the cabin no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a place to protect. Later that evening, as the storm raged again, Clara sat near the fire, one hand resting gently on her stomach. "The baby is strong," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Elias nodded, unsure what to say. She looked at him with warm eyes. "You've changed since I arrived." He frowned slightly. "How? You don't look like someone running away anymore." Her words surprised him. Outside, thunder rolled again. The cabin lights flickered. Elias felt a strange mixture of fear and hope growing inside him. The mountain was testing more than his survival skills. It was testing whether he could open his heart again. As night fell, another powerful energy surge struck the cabin. The power failed once more, and Clara suddenly winced, gripping the edge of the table. Elias turned toward her quickly. Her breathing changed. Pain crossed her face. And in that moment, as the storm reached its loudest roar, Elias realized something terrifying. The mountain winter was far from over, and Clara might need him more than ever before. The storm outside reached its strongest point during the night. Heavy winds struck the cabin walls again and again, and blue lightning flashed across the sky like silent waves of energy. Inside, the air felt warm but tense. Elias stood near Clara, watching her carefully. Her breathing was uneven, and she held the edge of the table as another wave of discomfort passed through her body. She closed her eyes and took slow breaths, trying to stay calm. "It's too early," Elias said quietly, more to himself than to her. Clara nodded slowly. "I think it's just stress, the storm, the power surges." Even though she spoke calmly, Elias felt fear rise inside him. He had faced storms, wild animals, and dangerous terrain before, but this was different. This was not something he could fix with tools or strength alone. He guided her gently toward the chair near the fire. The warm light flickered across the wooden walls, making the cabin feel smaller but safer at the same time. "Sit," he said softly. She listened, lowering herself slowly into the chair. After a few minutes, her breathing steadied again. "It passed," she said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. Elias nodded, but he did not relax completely. He stayed close, watching for any sign that the pain might return. Outside, the storm continued through the night. Snow tapped against the windows, and the wind created long, whistling sounds between the trees. Elias barely slept. He sat in a chair near Clara's bed, checking her condition every hour. When morning finally came, pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, turning the snow outside into a soft silver field. Clara woke slowly and looked at him. "You stayed awake all night," she said. He shrugged. "Just making sure everything's fine." She studied his face for a moment but did not argue. Days passed, and the storm slowly began to weaken. The strong energy waves became less frequent, though the mountains were still buried under deep snow. Communication systems remained offline, and rescue teams had not yet returned. Inside the cabin, life moved forward quietly. Elias continued working on the cradle he had started carving weeks earlier. The smooth wood curved into a strong shape, simple but beautiful. He added small details without thinking, rounded edges, sturdy legs, and a soft lining made from extra blankets. Clara watched him work one afternoon. "You didn't have to do that," she said gently. "I wanted to," he replied. The words surprised even him. She smiled and rested one hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move. "She will like it," Clara said softly. Elias paused. Clara nodded. "I think so, just a feeling." He looked back at the cradle, imagining a small child sleeping there. The thought felt both strange and comforting. Evenings became their favorite time. They sat near the fire, sharing stories or simply enjoying the quiet together. The cabin felt warmer than ever, not because of the heater, but because of something deeper growing between them. One night Clara asked, "Why did you really come to the mountains?" Elias hesitated. "I told you about the mining accident," he said slowly. "After that, everything felt heavy. People expected me to keep going like nothing changed. I couldn't." "So you left," she said gently. "Yes, and did it help?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "At first, silence felt easier than talking, but after a while, it felt like I stopped living." Clara listened quietly. "Maybe the mountain didn't bring you here to hide," she said softly. "Maybe it brought you here to heal." Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. A few days later, the storm clouds finally began to break apart. The sky turned clear for the first time in weeks, revealing the twin moons shining brightly at night. Snow reflected their light, making the entire valley glow softly. Elias stepped outside and breathed in the cold, fresh air. The world felt calm again. Inside the cabin, Clara moved slowly but comfortably. Her strength had returned, and the earlier pain had not come back. Still, Elias remained alert, ready to help if needed. One afternoon, he detected a faint signal on his communication device, a rescue beacon. The colony network was coming back online. Elias stood silently for a moment, staring at the blinking screen. Help would arrive soon. Clara would be able to leave. The thought created a strange tightness in his chest. He walked back inside and found Clara folding small pieces of fabric into baby clothes. "The network is returning," he said quietly. She looked up, understanding immediately. "That means rescue teams will come soon," she said. He nodded. Silence filled the room. Neither of them spoke for a while. That evening they sat together on the porch watching the stars. The air was cold but peaceful. Snow-covered mountains stretched endlessly around them. "I never expected to stay here this long," Clara said. "Me neither," Elias replied. "Thank you," she added softly, "for everything." He nodded but did not speak. Words felt too small for what he wanted to say. As days passed, the sky remained clear. Elias repaired a few damaged systems outside, while Clara prepared the cabin for normal travel again. She packed some of her belongings, placing them neatly near the door. Each small action reminded Elias that her time here was ending. One morning he saw a distant light moving across the horizon, a shuttle. It flew slowly over the mountains, scanning the land below. Elias felt his heart beat faster. Rescue had come. He turned back toward the cabin and saw Clara standing in the doorway, watching the sky with quiet emotion. Neither of them spoke, but both understood what the moment meant. The winter that had brought them together was ending. Soon, choices would have to be made. As the shuttle moved closer, Elias realized something clearly for the first time. He was no longer the same man who had lived alone before the storm. The mountain had changed him, and Clara, and the child she carried, had become more important to him than he ever expected. The question now was not whether she would leave. The question was whether he would let her go without telling her how much she had changed his life. The rescue shuttle circled once above the valley before beginning its slow descent. Snow lifted into the air beneath its engines, spinning like silver dust in the sunlight. Elias stood on the porch of the cabin, watching silently. Behind him, Clara stepped outside, one hand resting gently on her stomach as she looked toward the sky. The long winter was finally ending. For weeks, the mountains had belonged only to them. The storm, the silence, the shared routines that slowly turned strangers into something more. Now the outside world was returning, bringing choices neither of them had spoken about directly. The shuttle landed in a clearing not far from the cabin. Its engines powered down with a low hum and the air became quiet again. "They found us," Clara said softly. Elias nodded. He felt relief but also a strange heaviness that he could not ignore. Two rescue workers stepped out of the shuttle, scanning the area before walking toward the cabin. They greeted Elias first, thanking him for responding to the emergency beacon. One of them checked Clara's health monitor and confirmed she was stable. "You're lucky," the pilot said. "Storm season trapped half the colony. We're just now reopening travel routes." Clara smiled politely, answering their questions calmly. Elias stood slightly behind her, listening but saying little. Every word about leaving felt like a small step away from the quiet life they had built together during winter. After the rescue team finished their checks, they gave Clara time to gather her belongings. The pilot said they would leave within a few hours. The cabin felt different that morning. Clara moved slowly from room to room, packing the few things she had brought and the many small items she had made during her stay. Folded baby clothes, cooking tools she had repaired, a blanket she had stitched from extra fabric. Elias watched her quietly. He told himself this was how things were supposed to be. She had her own life. He had his. The winter had simply crossed their paths for a while, but the thought of returning to complete silence felt heavier than ever before. Clara paused beside the cradle he had built. She ran her fingers gently along the smooth wood. "You made something beautiful," she said. He shrugged slightly. "Just needed something to do." She looked at him with a small knowing smile but did not argue. Outside, the rescue crew prepared the shuttle. The sound of moving equipment echoed faintly across the snow. Inside, time felt slower. They shared one last meal together at the small wooden table. Clara cooked as she always had, simple food that somehow felt warmer and richer than anything Elias remembered eating before she arrived. They spoke about small things: the weather, the repairs needed after the storm, how the valley might look when spring arrived. Neither of them spoke about goodbye. After the meal, Clara stood near the doorway, holding her coat. She looked around the cabin slowly, as if trying to remember every detail. "This place saved me," she said quietly. "And so did you." Elias felt his throat tighten. "You saved yourself," he replied. She shook her head gently. "Maybe, but I didn't do it alone." Outside, the pilot called out that they were ready. Clara stepped forward, then paused. She turned back toward Elias. "I never wanted to stay somewhere forever because I needed help," she said softly, "but I will always remember what we built here." Her words were kind, but they felt like a farewell. She stepped out onto the porch. Elias remained inside for a moment, staring at the cradle at the chair where she used to sit, at the small changes that had turned his lonely cabin into a home. He imagined the days ahead after she left. Quiet mornings, silent evenings, no laughter, no shared meals. The thought felt unbearable. He walked quickly toward the door. Outside, Clara had reached the edge of the clearing. The rescue workers waited respectfully near the shuttle, giving them space. "Clara," Elias called. She turned. He stopped a few steps away, unsure how to begin. Words were never easy for him. He had spent years avoiding conversations about feelings, but he knew he could not remain silent now. "I thought I came to the mountains to hide," he said slowly. "I told myself I didn't need anyone, that being alone was easier." She listened quietly. "But you changed that," he continued. "Not by trying to, just by being here. You made this place feel alive again." Clara's eyes softened. "I don't want you to leave because you have to," he said. "I want you to stay because you choose to. And because I choose you too." The words felt heavy but honest. For a moment, only the sound of the wind moved between them. Clara stepped closer. "I never wanted a hero," she said gently. "I just wanted someone who would stand beside me." Elias nodded. "I can do that." She smiled, and something warm filled the space between them. The rescue pilot waited patiently, but Clara turned toward him and shook her head. "I'm staying," she said. The pilot nodded respectfully and returned to the shuttle. Within minutes, it lifted into the sky and disappeared beyond the mountains, leaving silence behind once more. But this silence felt different. It felt full. Spring arrived slowly after that. Snow melted into streams that ran down the valley. The trees turned green again, and sunlight filled the cabin through open windows. Elias expanded the house, adding new rooms and stronger solar panels. Clara planted herbs near the porch. Laughter became part of daily life. When the baby girl was finally born under clear skies, Elias held her carefully, feeling a deep sense of peace he had never known before. He was no longer just a mountain man surviving alone. He was part of a family. Sometimes, neighbors from nearby settlements visited, bringing supplies or stories from the colony. They spoke about Elias as a strong man who had helped many travelers survive the mountains. But Clara knew the deeper truth. The mountain had not only tested his strength. It had opened his heart. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, Elias would smile and say it began with a storm and a broken shuttle. But in his heart, he knew it was more than that. He had hired a cook for winter, and she had taught him what love really meant.